Greetings from Semillas, an independent working-class think tank and action center. And this is our weekly news and review broadcast for the week of June 22nd through 28th, 2026. So what happened to our war with Iran? 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump was bombarding Iran. And then by the middle of last week, he announces there's a peace treaty underfoot. Then this past Sunday, he was once again threatening to annihilate the Iranian negotiators, after Iran announced it would close the Strait of Hormuz, blocking all the oil again. What is going on with the Iran-U.S.-Israeli war in the Middle East? And can it ever be resolved? Well, things have calmed down since Sunday, but remember, there is no peace treaty in place. What both sides are talking about is negotiating an MOU, a Memo of Understanding, that will eventually lead to a peace treaty, maybe. So right now, they're trying to make an agreement months down the road. The problem right now is that item number 1 in that Memo of Understanding says stop the bombing, that war hostilities must cease on all fronts in order to move on to item number 2. But this is a war involving both the United States and Israel on one side, and Iran and its ally Hezbollah in Lebanon on the other side. And Israel refuses to back off bombardments and mass killings of civilians in Lebanon. So we can't get past item number 1, stop the killing and bombing by Israel, and that's a deal breaker for Iran. And the vast majority of Israeli leadership, our allies, are actually against Trump negotiating a peace deal. The problem is that Israel refuses to comply with the United States, who equips most of Israel's military capacity. And remember that Israel has a tremendous political power inside the United States. They have the loyalty of most of the U.S. Congress and senators, the legislature of the United States. And this makes Donald Trump's efforts to get out of this war very difficult. On a positive side, Vice President J.D. Vance has been inserted into the process to try to negotiate between all the parties, Iran, Israel, the Arab allies of the United States. He asserts that there is positive movement forward as of today. We shall see. And all that oil locked up behind the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, it's slowly starting to move out. But an estimated 2,000 ships of various sizes are waiting to get out. A tanker of oil going to a refinery in Southeast Asia will take 3 months before it becomes gasoline ready to be used in California. And when Iran threatens to reclose the strait because Israel keeps bombing, and then Trump threatens to assassinate Iran's leaders, shipping companies are reluctant to go back into the Persian Gulf. Remember, this entire matter has turned into a debacle, a quagmire for the United States. And as Semillas News and Review reported several weeks ago, there are only 2 options available. One is total war, requiring at least 500,000 soldiers for a ground assault that would cost tens of thousands of lives and risk nuclear warfare as one option, versus the other option of tactical retreat, getting the hell out of there as soon as possible. Right now, Trump has chosen option number 2, but he needs to put the best spin on this, since the war hawks in both Israel and the United States Congress and the media are attacking Trump's attempt to get out. The war hawks are willing to risk mass destruction to people and the economy with no guarantee of any success. Truly insane thinking. In related news, Trump revealed that one of the underlying reasons for his trying to get out of the Iran conflict was the impending economic collapse that he saw coming worldwide. And if you look at the chart of oil reserves held by the United States, it shows our national oil reserves running out. You can see why he could have this concern. And it's not just the United States that's facing potential bottlenecks in its economy due to the shortage of energy. The many countries in Europe, Southeast Asia, are already facing economic collapse. People are going without transportation, going with less food. Countries such as the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, Korea have all been impacted. The clock is ticking, and Trump recognizes what he has on his hands is a potential economic collapse right at a point when he is facing midterm elections this coming November and potential loss of Republican majorities in both the House and Senate. In further economic news, we keep focusing on this concept called the K-shaped economy, where very few people at the top are doing very, very well, while the bottom 60% of the population are struggling with their day-to-day necessities. Here in the United States and globally, it's worse. This so-called K-shaped economy was in the news again this week. Chief Executive Officer pay for the S&P 500 companies, the top 500 companies in the United States, now averages, get this, $17 million per year. And a record number of executives now make over $100 million per year. In another report, the ranks of those having a net worth of over $30 million jumped by 14.4% last year alone, according to wealth rating firm Alt-Rata. The total number of persons in these ranks amounts to 556,000 persons worldwide, or just 0.0067 of 1%. And according to the World Inequality Report of 2026, there are 60,000 persons worldwide worth at least $254 million, 0.0007% of 1% of the world population has the majority of the wealth. Both reports say that there are now more millionaires being created than ever before. But as you can see, this represents a tiny portion of the world population getting the lion's share of wealth. Note that 37% of these individuals live in the United States, 10% live in China, and 5% live in Germany. However, this contrasts with the consistent reports of inflation and rapidly rising costs of living, leading to a downward trend for large parts of the American population. Data by the Intercontinental Exchange, reported in the Wall Street Journal this week, shows the cost of owning a home in the United States has risen by 39% since 2019 to 2025. The cost is now $28,596 to own a home. But that's for the U.S. average home price of under $400,000. If you live in California, and especially LA County, the average home price today is $949,000. So instead of costing you $28,000 to own a home, your cost to maintain a home is now over $70,000, with property taxes alone eating up about $12,000, and interest at today's rates taking over $50,000. Add the cost of property insurance, healthcare, transportation, and you can see why thousands of people are now abandoning LA County and California in general. But the only priority our politicians seem to be able to think about is how to raise more taxes. Families are now voting with their feet in California. Oh, by the way, speaking of voting, Semillas News and Review made a big mistake in its report last week that we needed to retract. We stated that the California elections were now over. No, ballots are still being counted, and we are still waiting for official results in what is a bizarre indicator that the richest state in the nation is incapable of doing something most poor nations are able to do. And we wonder if there might be a link to this next story. On Tuesday, the Department of Justice, the DOJ, held another press conference announcing charges against 450 defendants nationwide involving over $6.5 billion in medical-related fraud. This included 300 persons who had submitted over $500 million in false Medicaid claims. The charges, announced by U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche, spanned 41 states. This press conference follows another announcement this past May by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator, Dr. Mehmet Oz, announcing the revocation of 800 hospice care facility licenses in LA County alone. Federal investigators identified that an estimated $1.4 billion in Medicare and Medicaid funds were suspended or cut off from suspect home health and hospice providers. It turns out that LA County has more hospice care facilities than most other states combined, many billing for fictitious patients. Much of this information regarding fraud has been generated by citizen reporters like Nick Shirley, who broke the famous Leering Center fraud scheme involving Somali immigrants in Minnesota. And Shirley has been one of the investigators involved in the California hospice revelations. In response, the California State Legislature is now sponsoring California Assembly Bill 2624, introduced by Democratic Assembly member Mia Bonta, wife of State Attorney General Rob Bonta. The legislation is officially titled the Privacy for Immigration Support Services Providers. State Assemblyman Carl DeMaio is asserting that the legislation is intended to criminally penalize whistleblowers like Nick Shirley to discourage independent citizens investigating government programs of fraud. So if citizens are being discouraged to investigate, who should be responsible for dealing with massive government fraud? This will surely become a main topic for California's upcoming governor's election campaign, which will pit longtime Democratic operative Javier Becerra against Republican muckraker Steve Hilton. Remember, ex-Congressman Becerra was the former Health and Human Services Director under Joe Biden, and Becerra touts this role as proof of his ability to run California. However, Becerra is sure to be scrutinized for the healthcare fraud debacle that has emerged over the years when he was in charge, where hundreds of billions of dollars have been pilfered via Medicaid-related fraud paid for by the HHS. Of course, Becerra will assert he knew nothing about this massive fraud, just as he has asserted that he knew nothing of the political laundering scheme that involved his own political bank account, used in the fraud scheme that Governor Newsom's former chief of staff, Dana Williams, has now pleaded guilty to in court. Either way, not a good look for a potential governor. Finally, we want to leave you with a tribute to a political leader who just announced that she is stepping aside. Semillas, as an independent working-class think tank, has a very low level of respect for most politicians in both Democratic and Republican parties. However, we are actually praising and paying tribute to somebody who we feel has stood up for the American people. We're referring to former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who ran for president in 2020 and eventually swung over to supporting Donald Trump's presidency in 2024. She was appointed to a very high-level cabinet position as the Director of National Intelligence. In that capacity, she coordinated some of the most important national security information confronting the United States at the international level. Director Gabbard faced the wrath of her boss, Donald Trump, when she refused to bend to the rest of the Trump administration's claim that Iran was weeks away from being able to produce a nuclear weapon. Director Gabbard stated in a congressional testimony and within the Trump cabinet that Iran posed no imminent nuclear threat and had no intent of building a nuclear weapon. Remember that this supposed threat from Iran was one of the main reasons cited by the administration for launching the subsequent war with Iran at a cost of thousands of deaths and hundreds of billions of dollars in cost and damage. Director Gabbard was put out to pasture after her testimony last year. However, in a final testimony to the American people this week, Director Gabbard has released a major bombshell that you can find posted on YouTube.
Now, until now, evidence regarding the full existence and funding of these laboratories had been knowingly withheld from you, the American people.
It is a startling revelation. Ms. Gabbard asserts that the COVID pandemic that started in 2020 and killed millions throughout the world was definitely manufactured in a Chinese lab, but directed through the U.S. deep state connection that was headed by no other than the now famous Fauci, the person coordinating the U.S. government response to the virus itself. This sounds like something right out of a spy-fi novel. But Gabbard has produced 2 thick volumes of documents outlining the entire matter, how the virus was first created through a sponsorship from U.S. funding via the National Institute of Health that was motivated by big pharma industries seeking to create global vaccines. Dr. Fauci, according to Gabbard, was involved in a major conspiracy. First of all, he was central to funding the lab research work in the Chinese Wuhan laboratory. He broke the law in order to bypass the legal restrictions on such research in the United States. Then the COVID virus escaped the Chinese lab. Then Fauci directed a misinformation campaign that asserted that the origin of the virus had been the Wuhan wet market, with its origin coming from bats in nearby caves. To this day, most Americans still do not know the real story behind one of the greatest health disasters ever. Ms. Gabbard outlines in the 2-volume report what happened after the virus broke out, infecting hundreds of millions of people throughout the world, killing millions of people, with the hero of the COVID pandemic response, Dr. Fauci, being the main culprit, the villain behind the entire matter. You need to watch the story yourself in order to begin to get a grasp of the magnitude of this all. And what has been the reaction in the mainstream media to this startling revelation? There's been a news blockade for the American people, with most media outlets refusing to cover the matter. A complete news blackout. Truly astounding. Can you see why a news outlet like Semillas News and Review is absolutely vital? America is at a crossroads, and the working class has no hopes of political leadership coming from the two parties that created this mess in the first place, Democrats and Republicans. The parties of war and destruction, the parties serving the financial oligarchy. Semillas is a working class think tank and action center. Our goal is to provide you with the information and education you need to become a better leader in your own community. And together, we, the majority of this nation, will forge a new path forward. We have a number of new videos for you to view to help you on this path. Please stay with us. Like, subscribe, contact us, and help us financially sustain this path forward. And until next week, this has been the Semillas News and Review.
Semillas Community Center is a working class think tank and action center. We have a plan, sowing the seeds of transformation.